Hey everyone, and welcome back to Gotcha Interact. In today's video, we're actually going to be talking about Hoyoverse kind of more as a whole. We are seeing in Star Rail right now that they have announced, at least a couple weeks ago, that they're going to be buffing older units. We've already seen some great changes with the second anniversary. If you've played the game, you've seen a lot of the changes there, free characters, yada, yada, yada. So we kind of wanted to compare that to Genshin a little bit and talk about just the kind of what if you will, of since they're doing this in Star Rail, would we or could we ever see something similar maybe in Genshin like this? So without further ado, let's jump right into this discussion. So I have a few things written down, and actually you do too, Vixen. But one of the biggest ideas I think overall to talk about first is the idea that they're buffing older units. If you saw the Star Rail announcement, guys, you saw that they're going to be buffing older characters like Kafka, Silverwolf, and I think even a character like Blade. And so with that in mind, Vixen, I guess I'll just ask you first, if they can do that in Star Rail, maybe why are they doing that in Star Rail? And then how, what is your opinion on them doing that in Genshin? And maybe which characters would that be?
Well, I think overall, by the way, I think that actually instead of Blade, I think Blade is going to become a character that's going to be given, like he's going to be like a character that's going to be for free or something, or like that idea in a pool of some sort. But I think Jing Liu is actually the one that's going to get the buff instead.
Oh, okay.
Either way, it's similar kind of playstyle. Both those characters kind of play similarly, and it's definitely both types have kind of fallen out of the meta. But if we basically were thinking about that in Genshin terms, looking back at some old characters, right? So the first character we had out was Venti, then we had Zhao and Klee and Zhongli. So if you look at that kind of like first four cast, when we look at like Kafka, Silverwolf, and stuff like that, you start to see a very similar kind of option, right? So when you look at the first few characters that Star Rail had ever kind of gone through and released, the first few characters were Zila, Jing Yuan, Silverwolf, Luocha, Blade, Kafka, right? And then obviously Jing Liu came a little bit later, but you're starting to see some buffs of those older units. So maybe not necessarily your first four characters, but some of them definitely are in the beginning cast. And so similarly, would we see something in kind of the more recent characters? Now, Zhongli and Venti are probably not going to be getting buffs just because they are Archons, so I highly doubt that they're going to do anything to them, especially Zhongli,
Right.
considering when he originally released, he already got a
Yeah.
buff. Now, we're not saying that this is going to happen, but the what if. So I couldn't see even a what if of those characters getting buffed. A character like Zhao,
Right.
on the other hand, doesn't necessarily need it, considering a lot of what they've already done has kind of buffed him. The Farina, Zhao, Farazan, and Shan Yun. A lot of plunge help with a lot of different characters has helped that out a lot, and a lot of animo help as well, as future characters have come out as well. A character that I would like to see actually get some limelight would actually be Klee. Now, I know that she's an extremely clunky character, so if they could fix either how much damage output she did, fix just her kit in general, I think that if they made her just play differently, I think a lot more people would actually enjoy using and playing Klee, therefore actually making her a more viable good option to use. Considering we already have like slower, application characters like Mualani or other characters like that, having a character like Klee with a slow application, still could be used correctly. It just we kind of just need to figure out a way how. So I think like in terms of
Hmm.
buffing old units, I definitely like to see Klee at least get some limelight back, considering I don't think she ever
Yeah.
got any.
I think the biggest thing for me is Genshin being a little bit older. We've seen this mechanic with the Chronicled Wish where it's like trying to get all these older characters reruns and stuff because there's just more characters now in the pool because it's an older game. So Star Rail may eventually get to that point. We don't know. It's just Star Rail is newer and they haven't had to do something like that. Now they had been rerunning more characters at once. We've started to see like 4 characters a patch instead of just, the 2. So that's that change, I guess we saw a couple months started ago, I guess. So the thing is, with the Chronicled Wish, characters like Zhao were on that. Child is on that. Ganyu was on that. So if they were on that, is that kind of Genshin's way of getting these characters, I guess, more accessible because they're older and a little bit less relevant to meta things? And I
It
think,
seems like they're almost squeezing a quick penny, is my personal
yeah,
opinion a
because like
lot.
Zhao was on that, right? And you just talked about how Zhao was like has seen a lot of natural buffs through new characters, Shan Yun, Farina, like you were talking
Right.
about. I was like, yeah, no, that's a great point. So and then he was on the Chronicled Wish. So would he ever be put in a shop kind of interface where you could just like buy kind of like the Ruan Mei Luocha thing with Star Rail? I'm like, I don't know, but Klee would definitely, like you said, make more sense. Yes, she was also on the Chronicled Wish, but she's also just less relevant than even Zhao, I would say. And then again, Venti Zhongli being Archons, I agree totally that they wouldn't buff Archons because Archons are just, well, they're Archons and they should seem more static. But if we're being honest, Venti kind of needs something. Zhongli can live without something because he's still doing something that's kind of unique to what he does in the game. He still has one of the best shields in the game, which is oddly enough debatable now at this point because Lanyan, if you have C2 Lanyan, it's actually better if you're using a normal attack character, and I just think that's kind of funny because now Zhongli is starting to fall off, and then, you know, Lanyan's also your Viridescent support, so she's going to be better in that regard, depending on the team, of course. So it would be interesting to see buffs even in Archons like that. Maybe giving Zhongli some more damage potential, I don't know. Or just straight up make his shield stronger. I don't know what you'd have to do with him. Maybe give him more universal damage buffing for the team, because he does already have all resistance type shred for the character who has the shield. Maybe just make that stronger than it already is. Maybe something like that. Who knows? But all of that said, as far as buffing older units, there's quite a handful, honestly, that they could do this with. It's just the biggest difference with Genshin and Star Rail is that Star Rail's endgame and the whole power creep situation in Star Rail is a lot more rampant and a lot quicker. It just happens quicker. Like, it could be only 3 or 4 months later that a character starts to become irrelevant in Star Rail. Now, that's maybe cutting it a little close, or maybe a little bit exaggerating, but honestly, kind of
It's not
true.
that
Like,
far off.
we're at a point in Star Rail where characters like Acheron, characters like Firefly, are starting to fall off. They're not Apex tier anymore. They're not T0 in Pridewind. They're like T1, and it's just crazy because they're still, you know, Firefly came out in 2.3, and we're only in 3.2. It's almost been a full year, almost, and she's already been power crept. Like, she just has, objectively speaking. We have
Well,
characters like
and that's
Mighty,
the other thing.
Casterus, etc.
There are just plenty of characters that if they just, and I don't think that buffing older units is really what Genshin should do at the end of the day. Like, I know that
Uh-huh.
that's what Star Rail's doing, but like you said, right? Like, Star Rail is all about, you have to remember, Genshin and Star Rail play very differently. Star Rail is a turn-based game way more focused on strategy. Now, I'm not saying that Genshin isn't focused on strategy, but you're in real time. And at that point, every situation you do, every second matters. Whereas Star Rail, you can kind of, it's like a chess game. You can kind of sit back and look at things ahead of time, figure out your skill points, figure out this, figure out that, your buffs, how is your speed going to be affected, you know, where are you coming out in the next turn order. All that stuff is being calculated basically if you're trying to go crazy mode, and that's what you're looking at ahead of time. Genshin, on the other hand, you're instantaneously thinking of how you're going to be triggering buffs, and usually people, and I even did this actually not too long ago, if you're going to do this Spiral Abyss or something, you're thinking about, okay, my rotation right before I go in, and then you're just basically rinse repeating a rotation. Now, Star Rail, you're probably doing a very similar thing, but your enemies, and the same thing in Genshin, you know, some things can just kind of throw that out of order, whereas Genshin, you have to quickly kind of jump the gun on a lot of things. Star Rail, you have to think a little bit differently. The reason I say all that is because with Genshin, buffing older units wouldn't really help. I think that just like they're doing with the Stellar Convergence, though, in Star Rail, giving more access to more characters would help. Now, I know some people have been talking about, you know, having less characters the better, and, you know, having more kind of, you know, having the ability to maybe not get more characters and instead going into more vertical investment in those characters once you get to a certain point is actually better for your account. And I think that giving characters over like the Stellar Convergence does in Star Rail in Genshin would actually help people more than hurt them. In Star Rail, everything's a gimmick. That's why characters fall out of the quote-unquote meta, is because the MOC, the APOC for those 60 days or whatever it's up for, is absolutely beating the tar out of everybody purely because of that mechanic. So if you don't have something that's working with the mechanic, it becomes very much more difficult to do it. And it's always based on the characters that are in the banners. We saw it recently with Jing Yuan. Jing Yuan came back with a character like Sunday, and then also had the idea of kind of a memo sprite kind of idea with a pushing forward of all of that, and having the like extra
New relic
companion or
set.
something like that.
Kinda
Yeah,
like he's the
and
Zhao of
makes
Star
more
Rail. I
sense.
just saw a lot of natural buffing.
Exactly, has those natural buffs, and then with the, you know, new memo sprites coming in, you know, Jingwon got a nice little buff, and so with that game, it's a lot easier for those older units to still be usable in endgame content because they are still good in their niches. Genshin, on the other hand, straight power creeps each character into oblivion when they go into the next thing, because that's all Genshin is doing. Genshin is just purely on a power scale, whereas Star Rail is more on a gimmick scale. So that's what you're that's the difference that you're doing is Star Rail is adding new gimmicks all the time, whereas Genshin doesn't have any new gimmicks to add, so therefore the only thing they can do usually is run the gun into just higher scalings, higher damage potential, really with the characters.
Yeah, and that would move us into that next point. I think you also had written down is the fact that they're moving certain older units in Star Rail to the 50/50 loss pool, and specifically that, and not just moving them to the standard banner. Like if you go to standard banner, you're not going to pull Zila. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to pull for Castris right now and you're on a 50/50, you could lose and get Zila, and the other two of those would be Blade and Fu Xuan. You can lose to them. So that's pretty interesting. That only helps people. I think it's pretty neat that you can
That's where
lose
Blade
and get
was.
those characters. Yeah, yeah, and that's where we're at. We're at a point now where you lose to Blade. That's just sad,
And yeah,
man. So what are our thoughts on this? If they moved older units to the standard loss pool, not the standard banner, specifically just the loss pool, could we see something like that in Genshin? And I guess who would those characters be? This might be very similar to what we just talked about with buffing older units.
yeah. I mean, I believe that the stellar conversions that Star Rail has is Ruan Mei and Luocha. Now, with those characters, Luocha, once again, because Star Rail's more gimmicky, he's still actually extremely useful in a Mighty team, which is one of the better characters in Star Rail, at least one of the top 5 DPS in that game. And he kind of came back. Now, also keep in mind, gimmicky again, you have your super break teams. Your teams are just going full break. Ruan Mei is there. Both those characters are coming on the stellar convergence. So once again, I feel like to an extent, as much as buffing characters, old characters in Genshin would help because they're purely based on a power scaling, I think just giving older characters away is going to be better rather than just power scaling older characters. Because you want to save people's premium. Because if you're just power scaling, you're just asking people to spend more money to get these older units again when they come back up on these every once in a blue moon banners that come up with a Chronicled Wish. Whereas if you just give out these characters that are not really getting any sales on their banners anyways, it's hurting Hoyo anyways because they're putting out banners that
Right.
aren't making anything. Why not just go ahead and give the ability to grab some of these older units and let people still have fun with them and enjoy them while still having the time and the new banners to bring out new content and new stuff like you want to do. So that makes
Absolutely
more
agree.
sense to me. The shops
Like,
definitely make more sense. And also, it allows people to go further invested, like I was talking about, into those new characters and get more constellations for maybe the new units that they want.
yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking, if they give out a free Ganyu, or like she's in that pool of, free options, is that really going to hurt Escoffier and Skirk's sales? I
Probably
don't,
not. If
I
anything,
don't
it's
think
going to help.
so. If anything's going to help
Escoffier is
the
going to be
Effie
helpful with it.
specifically, she's fallen off so hard though that, the older characters have had their time to shine. They've had their time to make the sales. That time's over. They're not gonna, you have the reruns and make as many sales. Yet, like, yes, people still want to pay for that. The people who just genuinely, want Tartaglia, they're collecting all the Harbingers and they still haven't picked him up, because they weren't in the game maybe at the time. So let's
Right.
just say that's the case, So there will be people that want to get that. There's people right now that are getting Venti because they're collecting the Archons and they don't care that Venti's outclassed. They want Venti, and I respect that, like just collecting what they want to collect. So giving out for free in terms of thinking about sales or like what's good and meta, they've already, like I said, they've already had the time to shine. I feel like giving away old characters isn't really going to hurt. And in Star Rail, that's certainly the case. They're giving out a free Ruan Mei, which honestly, if anything, I would think it was a different character because Ruan Mei is pretty powerful still. Yes, she's falling off. We're seeing the decline, but she still has her usability, right? You've got all of the different break teams that like her, and even non-break teams like her because she is a general support and is buffing damage.
Right, it's the exact same thing, and I think that's the thing. Notice how the two characters they put on the shop though are supports, so they're still going to be extremely usable. Now that's the thing with DPSs, and it's the same thing really in Genshin, right? Kazuha is outclassed by somebody like Shilonen, but at the same time you can still use Kazuha. People right now are still using Venti because of his amazing grouping ability. People are still using Zhongli, even though C2 Lanyan is better. He still has a good usability in certain instances. Maybe he doesn't mess with some of the, sometimes swirl can be kind of weird sometimes where it can sometimes take off, an element. And sometimes if you're trying to vaporize or melt, sometimes it can actually hurt you. And so Zhongli, especially with the crystallize, is usually sometimes not getting in the way because his application is so low. So I think that sometimes these old units, especially when they're supports, are still extremely helpful and usable. Now those are Archons, but when we look at DPSs, they're obviously going to get power crept. So I think that it's the same thing what we would get in Star Rail. I think we need to start looking maybe at supports that would be maybe given away for free. And if we look at that, we have characters like Albedo, who's more of an off-field kind of damage dealer as well, like a sub DPS. But you have a character like Kazuha, like just talked about, Kokomi as well. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about back in the time of the end of Leeway and at the beginning of Inazuma, which was back in 2 point something, right? So this is 3 years ago that we're talking about this type of stuff. And I honestly think that at this point, you could easily do very well by just giving out a character like Kazuha or a character like Kokomi. Could help people get more constellations on their Kazuha, could help people get a Kokomi and actually use her. Once again, these freeze teams are coming up. People are going to want that. You know, once again, Luocha is coming out or is for free. Mighty teams are here. It would make sense. Kokomi's coming out.
Her too.
Kokomi
Or
would
like
be
him.
good with Escoffier.
Yeah.
So I
for
just think
sure.
that there's like that would be really good. You have characters like Shenhe, characters like Yelan. I just think that going with the support route is definitely going to be helpful. And if they were to do it, that's how I think it would and should be done.
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely a point to be said there. Like, yeah, it's more supports that we're seeing for free in Star Rail. Because why are they just going to give out here's a free DPS, especially the closer you get to newer DPS, the more just damage they're going to deal.
Yeah.
Because it's power creep. So I think that's a good point to be said. Also, with Genshin having a new endgame possibility, coming up, and that could be sooner than later than we even expect.
Right.
That makes even more of a reason to just have more characters, because now you're going to need a third team, which also
Right.
means not just more characters, but if you're using more, like if you're using more characters, then there's much higher chance that you're using older characters because it's what you have.
Correct.
And if some of this stuff is just given for free, that's definitely going to help. Having 3 teams, we already have Imaginarium Theater that's existed now for months. That has always pushed horizontal investment. You need like a lot of characters to at least level 70 and all this, that, and the other. So definitely going to help having more characters.
Yeah, and I think that shop is, once again, I think every time we look at it, I think that the shop just makes more sense. If you were going to do it, get the ability for maybe once a version, maybe once every other version, to maybe get the ability to maybe get a free character from the old pool of characters. And that's the other thing with Star Rail, is that with Star Rail, they have like the old characters like Luocha and Ruan Mei that are there. But also it's like adding new characters as well. So they're adding new, and the old are still going to be there. They're not doing the Chronicled Wish thing where, oh, you want the Mondstadt characters, Mondstadt Chronicled Wish. Okay, now the Leeway Chronicled Wish. Oh, but I wasn't here for the Chronicled Wish for Mondstadt, but I really want Eula. Too bad. Tough luck. And it's like, okay, well, you know what I mean? Like, there are just some people, maybe they
Yeah, it's not
wanted
like
to
we
get
have
C6 Eula or something.
Yeah, it's not like we had a Bellabog Chronicled Wish. All right, guys, here's your chance to get Zila,
Exactly.
Braun is standard. But like,
Now, I
see,
understand the idea with Genshin is that they always focus on doing everything nation specific, which I do like the idea. But if you really just look at how the people are acting, how the communities really are, this makes a little bit more sense to do. The shops, once again, just make more sense. That was a very good point about the end game, because the more teams you're going to need, the more supports you're going to need too, because that's only really 3, maybe 4, 5, 6 DPSs if you're really thinking about it. If you're trying to do a dual DPS comp or like a sub DPS and a main DPS, I don't know, throwing in your Chori somewhere, Rift. So,
Yeah.
of course. But I think that overall, I think that's what you would really come down to. Never mind that, but also they're talking about the light cones in Star Rail as well are going to be in the shop as well. We could actually get some more weapons. And I think that's another thing a lot of people will want is just more weapons. Putting more weapons on different characters. A lot of people I know throw Staff of Homo around, the block around 17 different people for some odd reason. And you know what? To each their own. But if you had the ability to maybe have, once again, a weapon shop, if you will, that's once again just staying up for a long period of time, and you just get maybe some stuff. It's the same thing with Sanctifying Elixir. You don't get them all the time, but if you get them every now and then, it can kind of help slowly progress your account, and also help the new players get to the point of endgame a little bit quicker and make them more invested in the game. That's the other thing. We're 5 years into the game. When you have new players coming in, the grind is still the same to get to where we are. And I think if you are able to give them a little bit more push and shove into the right direction, giving them more free stuff, even if it's older units, it's not necessarily going to make them cracked, but at the same time, it's going to help them maybe be a little bit more interested and acclimated and stay in, maybe get more, I don't know, like, as a business mindset, you'd think that you'd want to make them a little bit more addicted, so you give them a little taste.
Yeah.
Right, so you give them a little taste and a boost, and it's like, look what you've already created with your account. Do you really want to get rid of it? But, that's just my opinion, so that's just what I think. Well, that's everything we've got talking about everything here in this video. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We've talked about a lot. If this would ever change, this is not a, oh yes, this is going to happen with Genshin or Star Rail or whatever. We're just kind of just throwing up the idea of what if. So what would you do if Genshin was to do anything in the future with some of this stuff? Would you guys want certain things better? Maybe some things we didn't necessarily talk about. What would you guys do? Once again, though, thank you guys for watching the video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.